'Tis I, Fat Cow. During yesterday's live, Foodie asked one of her commenters a question that I felt I could respond to, let's say. She asked, what have I lied about recently that matters? For those that were wondering what that noise was, it's a wood pigeon that roosts on the top of my chimney, and the sound obviously comes down the chimney, and my chair is next to the chimney. Now obviously the that matters bit is quite important, because lying about food and lying about weight and lying about dress sizes and the such doesn't matter. We know that. Also, there's no point commenting on I believe it's called Poop Gate, because, well, that's academic, really. The evidence is there. The evidence is, well, in a court of law, it would definitely stand up. But I'm going to get back to that later. So I had a thought, or some thoughts. I was thoughting. What has Foodie lied about recently that matters? Now, I'm going to decide myself that recently is since Kuwait. Okay, because we're not going to talk about pre-Kuwait, pre-hijabi Foodie, because, well, quite frankly, I don't have enough note paper for that, because I have made notes. So where shall I begin? Okay, what have you lied about recently that does matter, Foodie? Let's start with Julia's wound after being spayed, shall we? Upon returning from the vet, you showed us Julia's wound. Now, the wound would have been sutured on a deep tissue and muscle level with dissolving sutures. But the actual surface level wound, the epidermis, was sutured with surgical glue. It was a very clean incision and then closing of said incision done with surgical glue. That was very tidy and very well done. And I know that the wound was closed with surgical glue because it looked identical to the two post-surgery wound closing with surgical glue I had when I had my cesareans. Okay? Very obviously surgical glue was applied. Yes, there were sutures, but they were deep tissue and muscle sutures that would have dissolved in time. Then, in a couple of days, there was a photograph of Julia's wound that quite evidently looked as if the surgical glue had been pulled apart somewhat, and although there was no blood or anything because there had been some healing already, the surgical glue was very obviously no longer attaching the two sides of the wound together. The wound in its entirety wouldn't have opened up because of the deep tissue sutures that were done with the disposable thread, and therefore the wound wasn't technically open in terms of it being a gaping wound, but the top level of closure was no longer doing its job. It had been split apart. The next photograph we saw of Julia's wound very clearly had 3 black sutures. There was thread. It was black. There was 3 knots, and it hadn't been there before. Once those sutures were removed, which was a trip Julia didn't need to make, because if it had been the surgical glue and the surgical glue had held, there would have been nothing to remove. After the initial operation that had been closed with the surgical glue, there would have been no need at all for Julia to go back to the vets. She went back at least twice after her operation, which wouldn't have been necessary had the wound remained closed. Once the sutures were taken out, you were given an antibiotic cream and a spray to continue applying for a further 10 days. At that point, the wound should have healed, and none of that would have been necessary had everything gone exactly how it should be and not how it appears to be, as in you manhandled her. Her wound came apart. Second lie that matters. Your friend whose husband received a WhatsApp message from a pretty girl with large bosoms. Now, this is academic because we can't prove it. We just know. All right? How about you saying you were getting a divorce? You know, that live where you kept asking and asking and asking for a donor and a donor and a donor, and you got a bit stroppy, and then the next day you said it was over. A single era was about to happen and you were going back to Canada, and you were so obviously lying about that being your intention, because you were trying to emotionally blackmail Salah into not refusing you foods that you wanted. How about fasting during Ramadan, which you did actually admit that you weren't? For 2 days you pretended you were breaking fast at the appropriate time. But then when you went to Canada, you admitted that that wasn't the case, and that you were pretending to fast. Okay, what about you not being high daily while in Thailand? You admitted to taking some gummies, a few, towards the end, but the amount of times you said you were not high when you were very obviously off your tits is quite incredible. And how about all the times you allegedly didn't get high while you were in Canada, all those times you visited? Yes. Well, I'm sure there's many, many more, but that's all I can think of off the top of my head, because I'm not going to make the effort to actually research this shit. Unless, of course, I'm called upon to provide video evidence that you yourself uploaded. I'm willing to do that, if asked. Now I have 2 questions for you while we're at it. My question 1 is, if the cat food donations, and we know there were 2 further donations that were made after you'd bought the food because you were asked about them in your chat during lives, and you never addressed those 2 donations after the $60 worth of donations you actually spent. Now, you said you were going to keep the cat food in the car because obviously being for street cats there's no point bringing it up. So my question is, if the cat food donations were only for street cats and not for Julia, Why did you bring the cat food up into your apartment and keep it below your desk and not keep it in the car like you said you were going to, which was quite a reasonable thing to do considering the food was for outside cats and didn't need to be brought inside at all? And my second question for you, Foodie, is regarding the aforementioned poop gate. 1, do you legitimately believe it didn't happen? In which case, aren't you worried about your sanity or your decline in your cognitive abilities? Aren't you worried about dementia at all? 2, is it just rage bait because you want us to talk about it and give you some content, because your actual content is so severely lacking and is quite frankly dismal? Or 3, are you trying to distract us from something that you consider even more disastrous? Is it your relationship with Salah or lack thereof, or the fact that there never was actually a genuine relationship, but now Salah can't even be asked to put in the effort for your sake? Or are you distracting us from something else, your food eating or the like, or the fact that it is very obvious your entire life currently has gone legitimately tits up, which would explain your complete and utter inability to control any of your food intake for even 24 hours, and the fact that the quantity of food has increased, the quality of the food has decreased, and the amount you're obviously spending on food has decreased. So by denying the whole poop cake gate for fiasco, and denying it even happening, despite the fact the evidence online is so conclusive that should we take it to a actual judge in a court of law, it would be deemed irrefutable that you are trying to distract us from something even worse. Has your fake husband actually in real life left you? Has your fake everything fucked off? Has the only person that can help you continue your facade given up? What are you trying to distract us from?